here's another argument. When we look at some of the apparent atrocities in the Old Testament, here's another argument from Hemant Mehta, or a statement really. Drowning just about everything alive? Not really a sign of love, is it?
No, it was a sign of judgment. He's talking about Noah's
Ark,
flood.
I assume, yeah.
And that was a sign of judgment upon a corrupt and enormously wicked world. So, right, it's not a sign of love.
No. But is it in contradiction to God being all-loving?
No, because God is holy and just, and so in a sense he administered capital punishment on these persons.
Okay. There are thousands of gods you don't believe in. What makes yours any different?
There's good evidence and arguments for the existence of a monotheistic God, and I think there are good evidences in the New Testament for the person of Jesus of Nazareth as God's decisive self-revelation. And that sets these Christian monotheism apart from every other religion or credo in the world.
Okay. Prayer has never fixed anything physically impossible. Why won't God heal amputees?
Well, God is sovereign, and it's up to him whom he chooses to heal or not. Amputees will be healed in the resurrection when we are raised from the dead with whole supernatural bodies. And until then, God has chosen not to do that kind of restorative work, apparently.
But would you go so far as to say that this hasn't happened or won't happen?
Well, let me say that I wouldn't go so far as to say that it couldn't happen. God could heal an amputee if he wanted to, but I don't know of any case that he has.
What about healings in general?
Well, Craig Keener's 2-volume work on contemporary miracles provides ample case studies, at least, for miracles in our day and age. It actually turns out that miracle reports are much, much more common than these atheists and agnostics would have you believe. If you talk to most people, many, if not most of them, will claim to have seen or witnessed a miracle.
I wonder, just a side note, do you ever get tired of responding to the same objections, saying the same things, giving the same arguments? You've been incredibly devoted to defending what you call mere Christianity and God's existence. Do you ever get tired of it and want to get into beekeeping or something else?
No, I don't think so. I don't. I mean, when someone says things like there's no evidence for God's existence, or God is just Santa Claus for adults, or something of that sort, I find these amusing, honestly. They kind of tickle me because they're just so
pejorative
silly.
And silly, really.
Yeah.
Okay. Where you're born essentially determines what you believe. Why is the truth based on geography?
Okay, I've written on this one quite a bit. And boy, where to begin? Let me say that if you think that the fact that where you're born affects what you believe, invalidates the truth of what you believe, then you are guilty of a textbook example of the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy is trying to invalidate a point of view by showing how the person came to believe it. So, for example, the fact that I believe that the Earth goes around the sun is due to the fact that I was born in 20th century Western society rather than in ancient Greece, for example. Does that make my belief that the Earth goes around the sun false or unjustified? Well, obviously not. That would be a genetic fallacy. And in the same way, it's true that people's religious beliefs are largely determined by where they're born, but that doesn't do anything to invalidate the truth of any one of those beliefs. That is a question of the evidence, and that therefore requires us to look at the evidence for and against these beliefs.
Right, so it would be fallacious to say you're only an atheist because you were raised in Portland, Oregon.
Well, it would be fallacious, but it would be a legitimate turning the tables, because this argument or objection is a double-edged sword. If it's true that your beliefs are simply determined by where you're raised, well, then if this atheist had been raised in medieval Europe, he would likely be a Christian. If he had been born in Pakistan, he'd likely be a Muslim. Does that mean that his atheism is therefore unjustified or false? Well, only if you endorse the genetic fallacy.
Two more.
Okay.
Why doesn't God make his existence evident? And really, I do find this problematic. This seems to me to be something of a subset to the problem of evil.
Yes.
He says, no hide-and-seek game lasts this long, which I thought was funny.
I think this is one of the more serious objections. It's called the hiddenness of God by philosophers who reflect on this. And here, what I want to say is that God, in his sovereignty, knows how people would react to whatever circumstances he places them in. Mm-hmm. So God knows whether or not more people would come to a saving knowledge of himself were he to make his existence more evident than he has. And given that God's will is to save as many people as possible, I think that it's quite possible that God has given evidence to us which is sufficient for those with an open mind and an open heart to find him and find eternal life. And that if he were to provide more evidence of his existence, no more people would come to find a personal relationship with him and eternal life. True, they might come to believe that God exists. They might add another item to their inventory of things that exist, but that doesn't mean that they would come to love him and know him and find eternal life, which is what is God's real interest. It's not just getting people to add another item to their ontological inventory. It's bringing them into this love relationship with himself. And I think for that purpose, God knows exactly what amount of evidence and hiddenness is appropriate to achieve that.
We see an example of this, don't we, in the book of Exodus, where God's existence is more apparent perhaps then as is today, and yet that doesn't mean they didn't worship the golden calf.
Right. They had the pillar of fire by day or by night and the pillar of cloud by day, and yet it didn't produce heart change in the people. They believed that God existed, but nevertheless, as you say, they turned to idolatry again and again with tiresome repetitiveness. Israel apostatized. So that's a perfect illustration of the fact that just making God's existence evident isn't a guarantee that more people will come to know him and find salvation, which is what God's real interest is. So the atheist, to put this argument through successfully, would have to show that if God's existence were more evident, that more people would come to a saving knowledge of him than do. And that's pure conjecture. We have absolutely no idea how the future is going to go or how to estimate that sort of thing. It's pure speculation.
Hey, if you enjoyed that clip, you will absolutely love the full interview, so click right there to enjoy the whole thing. Also, a big thanks to these groups who made that interview possible. Learn more in the show notes below about these guys. They're absolutely incredible and honored to have them as sponsors. Oh, and also, if you haven't subscribed yet, click subscribe and then that bell button. That way YouTube will be forced to let you know when we put out more content.